Global stocks have rallied after a sudden tariff turnaround by Donald Trump. The US president is suspending reciprocal tariffs on most nations for 90 days, China being the notable exception, with its imports hiked to 125%. News of the pause unleashed a tsunami of green as shares on the Dow Jones index ended 7% higher. Asian shares have surged too, with Japan's Nikkei jumping more than 8% in morning trading. Markets had feared an escalating global trade war before Trump suddenly backtracked on most of the sweeping tariffs. Here's the US president explaining his sudden decision.
You have to have flexibility. I could say, here's a wall, and I'm going to go through that wall. I'm going to go through it no matter what. And keep going, and you can't go through the wall. Sometimes you have to be able to go under the wall, around the wall, or over the wall. I think in financial markets, because they change. Look how much it changed today. We went from, pretty moderate today, but over the last few days it looked pretty glum, to, I guess they say it was the biggest day in financial history. That's a pretty big change. And I think the word would be flexible. You have to be flexible.
Well, it was the raised levies from China of 84% and Beijing's clear statement that it would not back down, which inspired Trump to single China out. Here's more.
The tit-for-tat tariff dispute continues without pause between the world's two largest economies.
As you all know, the president just put out a statement announcing an additional tariff on China. The tariff on China will now go up to 125%. because China imprudently decided to retaliate against the United States. And as I said at the podium yesterday, when you punch at the United States of America, President Trump is going to punch back harder.
On Truth Social, Trump said the new measure was, quote, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets. It comes after Beijing said it was imposing an 84% tariff on U.S. goods in retaliation and vowed to, quote, fight to the end in an escalating trade battle with Trump. The U.S. insists that the tariffs are necessary to revive its manufacturing and maintains that the blame for the escalation lies on Beijing.
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
Beijing says the U.S. is making a mistake and that it has filed a complaint to the Geneva-based World Trade Organization over the measures.
The Chinese people cannot be denied their legitimate right to development, and China's sovereignty, security and development interests must not be infringed upon. We will continue to take strong measures to safeguard our legitimate rights and interests.
The World Trade Organization has warned that rising tensions between the U.S. and China could see bilateral trade plummet by as much as 80%, and that the conflict could damage the global economic outlook.
Well, earlier, our correspondent Melissa Chan in Taipei told us more about Beijing's reaction on Trump's decision to pause all higher tariffs, except, of course, those on China.
Beijing is not surprised. They were slapped with tariffs during Trump's first presidency. So over the past few years, China has been preparing a toolkit for the eventuality if they have to deal with a second Trump term. So going into January of this year, the Chinese were prepared. And so this is not a big shock for them. But it is very interesting because for a while we weren't quite sure what the Trump 2 administration would do in terms of its approach to China. There were some early indications that President Trump was actually going to go soft on China this time around. A great example is TikTok. He had talked about banning it during the first term, but he's punting that issue. And the other consideration to make is, of course, his governing partner, Elon Musk, has a lot of investment in China, from Tesla factories to the sale of those vehicles to Chinese consumers. How would that impact the U.S. administration approach to China? But we have our answer, at least on tariffs, and Beijing is ready.
OK, and any indications on how China might react to this?
Well, China is playing a tough line, and it has a new data point that we've learned over the last few hours, which is that President Donald Trump folded pretty fast when it was the United States against the rest of the world. And now it is very much America alone. Even last year, if the United States was going to take a tough position on China, it could rely on allies in Asia, such as South Korea or Japan. But South Korea and Japan have been left scrambling over this past week as well. Where will they stand on the matter? Will they stand with the United States against China? In this current scenario, I think it's very unlikely.
And about 30 seconds left, Melissa. Any opportunities for China here?
Absolutely. I mean, the rest of the world can trade with themselves. I mean, there are a lot of, like I mentioned, South Korea, Japan, but India, ASEAN, Europe. These are all countries with a big middle class and a lot of manufacturing. And that is a real possibility that we're looking at.
DW correspondent Melissa Chan in Taipei, thanks so much for that. And business journalist Akin Oyedele gave us some more analysis as well. And I asked him if Trump's surprise move on tariffs was part of a bigger strategy or if it was forced upon him by the markets.
Well, the reporting that I'm seeing today indicates that the administration's hand was forced. Particularly today, we saw for the first time since this saga began, the bond market really began to react in a negative way. Now, of course, the stock market had sold off leading up to today, but today we saw the bond market and the dollar weaken. And those two markets are typically places where investors flock to for safety in times of crises. So that reportedly rattled the administration and the Treasury Department to the point where they made the decision today to put the 90-day pause on. But of course, if we're taking the administration's point of view, this was all part of a grand plan. But we do know that they had been watching the market and had been getting lots of calls from executives and from people in the Republican side of the aisle who were really concerned about the impact that this was having.
Yeah, and markets did rally after this back down was announced. How much more turbulence do you expect there'll be going forward, or is it now all over?
I think it's far from over, although I wish I could tell you in which direction, up or down, the market's turbulence would be. The two largest economies in the world are still in a trade war, so let's not lose sight of that, even though the rest of the world has been spared for now. We do know that a lot of American companies rely on China for a lot of their supplies, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about what this all means for them. Consumers may also be feeling uncertain at the moment, wondering whether the next iPhone or the next Nintendo Switch will cost many hundreds of dollars more than they do right now. So there's still a lot of uncertainty. And as we've seen in the last couple of days, things can change very quickly. So I would not unfurl the mission accomplished banner as of yet.
Just finally, how ready do you think the rest of the world is now to work with Trump on trade in the way that he wants? Or how ready do you think the rest of the world should get?
Well, as your previous guest was saying, the rest of the world can trade with each other. And that's part of the concern among some economists in the US is that China now becomes a more appealing trading partner for a lot of countries and companies that would otherwise have played ball with the US. But, I think it's still too soon to see just how effective these conversations between the US and other countries are, especially because we know there's a lot of volatility in the approach that this administration is taking. And so it's hard to see how much or which concessions individual countries make. We also know that there was a bit of a ad hoc mechanism to how the tariffs are slapped on various countries, and so it's really hard to tell whether countries will play ball. But we do know that they will at least pick up the phone and talk to the White House, and they should, because this is the world's largest economy after all.
Thanks so much for that, Akin. That's Akin Oyedele from Business Insider. Thank you very much.